Welcome back, everyone. In this episode, we have retired Chicago police officer Toni Isla, and now I'm going to have to read your line because it's actually pretty long what your new title is, but it's Executive Program Manager of Public Safety with Verizon Frontline. And Toni is going to share with us some of his experiences, what it's like to be a police officer in Chicago, and he's actually going to tell us about a time that he responded to an F-16 fighter jet that actually crashed. This is the Shots Fired podcast. I'm Mark Rutledge, and this is Kyle Schoberg.
All right, Toni, thanks for coming in today and flying all the way out here from Chicago. This is pretty cool. You're actually a guest that's flown the furthest just to come on the show. So, man, we seriously appreciate you making the time to make the trip.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thank you both for having me. I'm excited to be in your new studio. Congratulations on the new studio. But yeah, no, I'm grateful to you guys and excited to really just get right into it.
Well, hey, before we even get started, we went out to lunch. We had some fun. We'll share some of those little funny stories here in a minute. And Mark's short-term memory that Toni has now grown accustomed to.
Yeah,
but
he knows. He's heard.
You have some trivia questions for Toni, which I find to be funny because they're actually about Chicago, where he's from, but let's see if he gets them right.
Yeah, okay.
That's going to be tough. It might be tough.
All right, so what food is Chicago known for?
I'm going to probably take a lot of heat for this. I'm going to say deep dish pizza.
Okay.
But most people who know me, I actually don't like deep dish pizza.
Ooh.
Okay, but Chicago is known for deep dish pizza.
Yeah.
That's hard to actually say, deep dish
pizza. It's pizza, not pizza.
Yeah. All right. And then secondly,
I got that right, by the way, when he asked me.
He did.
I almost went with hot dogs.
Yes. Okay, so that's the second one. But what makes a Chicago-style hot dog a Chicago-style hot dog? You've got to know this.
Again, I'm going to take a little heat.
Come on, Toni.
Because I don't actually eat a lot of hot dogs. I have eaten them. I'm going to say it's the ridiculously green relish and the lack of ketchup on the hot dog, which I'm on the side of, I kind of like ketchup on a hot dog. So
really?
I'm a born and raised North Sider in Chicago, but I got to do the ketchup. Sorry. Sorry,
hey,
Chicago.
I'm on your page. It's got to be mustard and ketchup on mine. But you're right. So what actually makes a hot dog a Chicago-style hot dog is mustard, relish, onions, tomatoes, dill pickles, and peppers.
It's all kinds of stuff,
man.
That's right up my alley. Dude.
Yeah.
So
that and mashed potatoes.
And I brought over Chicago. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you guys have Wiener Schnitzel back in Chicago?
Wiener Schnitzel's, I would say, more of a Wisconsin thing. I don't say it's
So
non-existent.
have you been to a Wiener Schnitzel?
I know of it.
Okay. Well,
I'm pretty picky.
Because I was just curious when we were talking about Chicago dog. I mean, I get the Chicago dog from Wiener Schnitzel, and I was like, I don't know, is it like, where is it play up to the hype? But
I don't know. We have Wiener Circle in Wrigleyville, which if you ever go to Chicago and you're out later at night after a Cubs game, maybe after a bar, that's
Wiener
probably
Circle?
the place you want to stop at.
Yeah,
and you'll be insulted. That's their theme.
I don't know.
Good hot dogs
I
and a
feel
lot
funny.
of insults.
Really?
Yeah.
I just feel, hey guys, want to go to Wiener Circle?
Yeah, but it sounds like it's actually fun there. Like an enjoyable.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
good. I'm
the
sure
workers there they'll beat you up pretty much.
pretty funny.
That's
awesome.
that's what they're known for.
Yeah.
And maybe some hot dogs.
That's pretty funny.
Well, this is interesting. So usually we don't talk about food that much because Kyle is on a very strict diet, which he's actually not. No.
Yeah. Anybody who's ever watched this knows that's not true.
Yeah, that is very not true.
I'm trying to get better. That is true. I'm definitely tapering down on the diet thing. But
What did you eat for lunch
Separate
today?
than our actual lunch, we just ate that.
Yes, yeah. Toni, what did he eat today?
I thought it was nachos or something that we were going to share.
Yes, that he was going to share.
That was
it was huge.
It was, I don't know what it was, but I thought it was going to go in the middle of the table. No.
Yeah, so we actually sat and we had lunch with Toni earlier, and Kyle, you did order a really big nacho plate, which I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. He's ordering nachos for everyone.
It's called a super nacho for a reason. It's so good.
And you should have seen it because Toni like reaches over and I was like, Toni, those aren't for you.
Yeah.
It's like,
I was like, those are mine, dude. Get your own food. Yeah. And then he learned on the way back from lunch, Mark's short-term memory loss that he has, which he likes to blame on his stroke that he apparently had. When he tries to ask you if you've seen a movie on Netflix and then proceeds to tell you that you should watch it, but then says, I don't remember the name of the movie.
Right.
That happens quite often, especially when we meet people. He'll be like, Kyle, what was that guy's name again? And I'm like, dude, we just met him 2 seconds ago. Or he'll be like, hey, Kyle, that Steve guy is pretty funny. And I'm like, actually, his name was Dan. That happens quite often. So
it does.
You never know.
Yeah.
Who you just blame the stroke?
Yeah,
I do. I mean, I can't blame it because that's what happened. All right. So Toni.
Yeah, let's get into this. So Toni, you're from Chicago, born and raised. Tell us.
Born and raised.
Dude, you were telling us you went to an inner city school in Chicago. Like, what was it like growing up there? And we kind of walk us through like what got you into law enforcement, and then we're gonna dive into working for Chicago PD.
Yeah, no, it's I think it's an interesting story. I'm a born and raised Chicagoan, born on the north side, so by default I'm a Cubs fan. I did go to a private grade school, but did end up going to public high school for 4 years, which I thought was a great experience. I actually went to the military after I got out of high school. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I swam competitively through high school and even afterwards. In retrospect, I probably should have taken some money for college and swam, but I went to Lackland Air Force Base. I had signed up to do the Air National Guard, Air Force Reserves, and at the time at O'Hare, there was a combat comms unit, which I was a part of. But I fast forward, right? I was always into kind of graphic design or arts, so that's where I really started to study, right? Graphic design. Computer graphics was really growing in the 90s and really seemed interesting to me. So I got real deep into that. And one thing led to another. And as a lot of people in like the web design world or the 1999, 2000s came and the .com era was huge, right? There was a lot of young people who could make a website or new graphic design, were able to get some pretty good paying jobs. So one thing led to another, right? I've worked in some small and medium and one of the largest web development firms that was around in 2000 and then gone a year later, just like the rest of the .com. But, fast forward, I was reaching out to a couple friends, and right around the time I was working in the private sector, and I grew up in a neighborhood in the city where, like many parts of the city, a lot of guys go police or fire. Many of them are teachers. So a lot of my friends around 2000 or 99 were joining the police department. And one of my best friends, and he'll know who I'm talking about, he had actually reached out to me and said, "Hey, you want to take the police exam with me?" And this is 2000. I'm going to work at a .com in my pajamas, and I'm like, "Why would I go to the police exam when I have a job that I show up in my pajamas for?"
Sure, why not?
Yeah. So one thing, a couple years later.
So wait, did you actually do it?
No, I stayed. I've taken the train downtown. Go to my web design job. But after 9/11, after .coms kind of faded out and those businesses weren't around anymore, I actually called them back up and I said, "Hey, when's the next police exam?" And he goes, "You should have just taken this 2 years ago. We would have been in the academy together." But I thought it was a great decision. Again, I had a lot of friends who I talked to say, "Hey, I was looking at suburban agencies. I'd applied at some suburban agencies. But I thought there was a lot of opportunity just because of the size of Chicago. And I didn't know where I was going to go with my career, if I was going to do anything, if I was going to be just in patrol, would I want to be a detective, would I want to go on like SWAT with like some of your background. But I think the size was attractive, right? The size of the department, the size of the city, and I was a Chicagoan. So December 2002 or December 2nd, 2002 was when I joined the police academy, and everything changed from there on.
That's a lot of twos. 12.
I know it's a lot of twos, but we try to remember like your anniversary date of when you went on, because that was always, as you got more time on the job, that was always like, okay, now I'm 1 year closer to retirement.
Yeah.
But I spent a lot of time in patrol. I know on a previous episode, you talked about, what do police want to do, or what do people want to do when they're new recruits or applying. And I do think patrol is very important. It's ultimately the backbone of all the police departments. That's where you have the most officers. So I had a great experience in the academy. I always say, I also think living in the city and inner city and being exposed to a lot of things that I saw, it helped me in the police academy. It helped me even when I went to basic training in the Air Force, because I was prepared and I saw a lot of things. I was interacting with a lot of people and I saw the things that happened in the city. So the things that they, again, what about just like yelling at you the first day at the police academy?
Yeah.
Like, let's set the tone with these guys. Arguably, I would say living in the city, I was kind of used to that. And we're like, well, you could, I think actually it's more of a fireman story. One of the funniest things that they did was I was the first or second day of the academy. We don't have any uniforms on anything. We're still wearing a suit and tie. And one of the instructors comes out and he's screaming at everyone. He said, "Hey, if you're just here waiting for, the fire department to call you, you could just leave." And I'm pretty sure someone left.
Wow.
And we never saw that guy again. So I thought the academy was a great experience. And ironically, my homeroom instructor at the academy. Is now Superintendent Larry Snelling. He leads the entire Chicago Police Department now. So I'm proud to say that the current superintendent, who I admire, he was a great role model. He pushed us hard in all aspects in the academy, was our homeroom instructor. So I felt I had a great experience and maybe a little different experience having him as my homeroom instructor. He's well known for a lot of people. If you're listening to this from Chicago or you were in Chicago PD, he ran what was called Welcome to the Gym.
Oh, really?
And it was, if you were not in shape, it was a welcome to the gym.
He is now the superintendent.
He is the superintendent of Chicago
really
Police
cool.
Department. Yeah.
Which is, we actually looked that up because when I was doing some research on Chicago Police Department, it's interesting because there you guys use the term superintendent. In a lot of other agencies, they use the term like police chief or the sheriff. So the top person is superintendent.
Yeah. So I think that's interesting. Even in my role today as an executive program manager, I speak and meet with a lot of customers and law enforcement, fire departments. And we talked a little bit about this lunch, right? 10 codes, which are commonly used, right? And a lot of agencies, really, I won't say commonly, probably every agency uses some form, but it's not what's supposed to be a universal language. It's not really a universal language because what we say, we might say 19 Paul, which is you kind of just dismissing a job. Nothing really happened. That probably doesn't mean anything to you guys, but it might be funny if you're driving around Chicago and you see a license plate that says 19 Paul. You're like, oh, that's a police officer. And he's like, oh,
interesting.
all clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. Well,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I have one other thing that I wanted to ask you. So in the 1920s, who is the gangster that was responsible for bootlegging, prostitution, and gambling?
In Chicago.
In Chicago. I'm just going to have to say Al Capone.
Nice. All right.
Tony's
well done.
It's probably it's kind of funny to me because I don't think I really followed mob history or watched a lot of movies, but it was probably in the late 80s or early 90s. Honestly, I don't remember. There was a talk show, and Geraldo Rivera, who's a reporter now or was a reporter, he had his own talk show, and they were going to uncover Al Capone's vault. And that was a big thing on live TV where they say, hey, we found Al Capone's vault. And, we're all young watching TV and they found nothing.
That was disappointing.
That's my more
you
memory.
You actually disappointed both Kyle and I right now.
I felt like I was building it up like, there was going to be something.
What was in the vault?
Nothing. I think he found
nothing,
a
guys.
bottle. And that was about it. But I'm not big on the mob boss history, but I do remember the talk shows where I think in my age group, growing up in the 80s and 90s in Chicago, and anyone who watched that was like, oh, there's going to be something big in this fall.
Gosh, there was nothing.
Man, that's crushing.
Well, so you graduated the academy. What year did you graduate?
It was in 2002.
Okay. Was it
Remember the twos? 12?
Yeah.
2.
12,
Damn,
2.
now I forgot.
2000.
Yeah. Was it a living academy or do you?
No, it's not a living academy. It is a commuter's academy.
So you're out of the academy. Mm-hmm. Do you walk us, what is it like going on field training in Chicago? I mean, everyone knows of Chicago as it's a very well-known agency, city and all that. And how big is the city in total?
That's probably a trivia question you probably should have asked me that I do not know the answer.
Google it. Can you Google it?
Yeah, Google that.
What does Chicago?
How many? What's the population
of Chicago?
Oh.
And then how big is the department?
So when I was a police officer, starting 2002, and I probably changed halfway through, we were budgeted at 13,000 plus strong.
Okay, so it's huge.
It's massive agency.
I think LAPD is 10,000 ish.
Yeah.
So you guys are big.
I think we were kind of going back and forth as either the number 2 or number 3 largest department.
With New York's number 1.
Number 1 by a large margin.
So you're going out onto field training in Chicago. What was that like for you? And then kind of what is the culture of the Chicago Police Department like back then? And then you got to work in some busy districts in the city where crime is very high.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So field training or, even leaving the academy and then really going into your district, right? And so outside the academy, there's a stint, and this changes from year to year, sometimes depending on what's happening with the city and different initiatives. When I graduated the academy, we had a group, and I don't know if we had an official unit name. We were nicknamed by the media the Jump Out Boys.
And why is that, Tony?
Well, we slowly jumped out when we saw crime, and we had essentially vans that we would drive around different parts of the city. It was a lot of the new recruits. They weren't necessarily ready for us in the districts, right? So there was a time in between your graduation that they could use you for different things. It might be sometimes it's traffic details. And in this case, it was the jump up boys. So it was a lot of new recruits mixed with field training officers. It was actually some other officers and supervisors from the academy. And we essentially patrolled in vans wherever they needed us in any neighborhood. And you were with, anywhere from 5 to, if it was a 10-person van, all of your recruit classmates now
That'd be awesome.
on the streets patrolling.
I'm struggling to comprehend that because at my department, if you got to be part of a team that did that, you had to have some time on.
Yeah.
And here it's like,
that's what
hey,
I'm wondering.
Tony just graduated.
Yeah.
Let's put him out there in the most high risk situation, making a high risk stop. And
No, not just Tony. You know what? Let's grab all of the recruits.
all of his
You
buddies.
try to gather
All of his buddies.
your best buddies, right?
Oh, yeah.
From the
They're gonna
academy.
joke
Like, we
around
all
and
want to ride together.
see crime afoot and then jump out and
Needless to say, it
How are you
doesn't
gonna
exist.
learn?
It doesn't exist
Yeah.
anymore. Okay, they changed it. It was a great unit. I think we got some interesting experience. The nickname, I believe, came from the gangbangers and the
Yeah.
drug dealers because when they were doing stuff, there were 5 to 10 guys. They weren't getting away. There's someone in
yeah.
that group is probably in shape enough just out of the academy to catch anyone. So that they started calling everyone, oh man, it's the jump out boys. Then the media picked that up.
Awesome. So what would you have the population?
I
here?
did. It says right here in 2023, so it's a little low. It's 2.6 million.
It's probably gone down. I know there was an exodus a little bit in Chicago.
I feel like it'd be more actually, but okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, so after I guess I know it was probably a long summer of being on the Jump Up Boys, I ended up going to the 15th district, which is on the west side of Chicago. And you start to get paired with your field training officer, which again I thought it was a great experience at the time.
So wait, what? So the west side, how is that? Can you describe what the west side is? Like if you're to work an area, is that where young cops want to go?
I would say yes, right? So if you're a young cop, I do believe go to patrol, go to where it's busy and the west side. So if you're in downtown Chicago and go miles west, right? That's the whole area. A lot of gang problems out there at the time. Crack was still huge. You name the drug, it was probably being sold out there. Multiple gang factions just fighting each other. So in any given day, you were probably doing way more than if you were to go like as a new officer to a slower district, right? So take the 16th district in the city of Chicago. That's actually where a lot of city workers live. Actually, a lot of police officers live. It's a nice place to go. And maybe in the tail end of your career, you might want to work there to
Just kind of relax
a little bit. But if you're a new officer, you're just not going to get as much experience, even just say doing traffic stops or going to domestics, because it's just not happening at that volume. On the west side, it would be easy to have 2 arrests a day.
Well, when we were at lunch, it was interesting because you were like, yeah, I worked on the west side. And that was before you described to us what the west side was. We didn't know if it was nice or not. And you're like, you'd go to multiple domestics, probably a shooting, some fights, maybe a stabbing.
Maybe
then you'd go to
10
lunch.
homicides.
Yeah. Then go to lunch. And it's like, okay, that's a busy area.
Yeah. It's, for me, I think working with the field training officer, someone who's experienced. And at the time when I went to the district, there weren't enough FTOs. And that's always, even today, right? Staffing and retention is a problem. So even there, right? We're still struggling to get people to be field training officers. So one of my first, I'll say quotation, air quotes, right? FTOs was just another officer, which for me, I thought that was a great experience because he had a lot of experience. He had worked plain clothes. He had worked on tactical teams. And he spent, at least at that point, most of his career on the west side. So he knew all the ins and outs. He knew the streets like the back of his hand. And, for me, I think from a training aspect, not just understanding like how to be good at paper, knowing what to say and sometimes what not to say, but working with an officer who knew the ropes and knew the streets. To me, that was one of the biggest things. And I don't know if this is when you guys were younger in your patrol careers, when I was driving around, and I think one of the old timers had said this to me, it's like, look where you're at. When you're driving around, just don't look at what's happening on the streets. Like, look at the street signs. Mm-hmm. And every now and some good FTOs would just stop you and say, okay, hey, where are we at?
Yep.
Madison Central.
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
you're paying attention. And for me, that was one of the biggest things because obviously you have all your equipment, right? Is that working? Is the car working? You're responding to jobs, but do you know where you're at? Because that's going to be the biggest thing. If you have to actually get out of the car, you got to know where you're at. So to me, working with the FTO, I mean, they did a lot of great things, knowing where you're at and being able to communicate that verbally to me was a huge thing.
Well, having like a real seasoned years on FTO, there's so much value in that. I know there's young cops that have 2-3 years on, but those cops that have 10 years on, that have worked the same area like you're describing, the value that you get from them is irreplaceable because you're right. You really learn how they talk, they carry themselves, they know people, they talk to kids. It's like, that is problem-oriented policing. Like that's your neighborhood cop that knows everything. They start to gain trust amongst the community. And then you realize like there's more to being a police officer than just putting handcuffs on someone.
Oh, 100%. I think one thing that even as a young officer, and this I argue probably happens today, right, is being able to communicate with the people either that you're serving because they need help. Obviously, there's people you're going to arrest, or sometimes you are going to have to go hands-on. But there's a point in all those circumstances that you're going to have to communicate. And depending on your own personal background, you can do as many scenarios as possible in the academy. And it's a limited time. And Chicago's academy at the time was long, but you can only do so many scenarios because you're going to do physical fitness, control tactics, firearms training, law class. You do some scenarios, but not until you get into the field. That's when you're really going to test yourself to see like how can you communicate in all these different circumstances. And if you think about the average person when they're growing up, they're not really interacting with a police officer that often unless something bad has happened. The officer friendly days, those kind of happened, but when you become the police, it's different now because most people's general interaction with the police officer is a bad experience or they've been a victim of something. Now you have to be on the other side of the table. And how do you handle someone at a domestic, whether is it calm? Is it violent? Is it just a traffic stop, right? Which isn't always just a traffic stop. Are you dealing with the victim? So being able to communicate, have awareness is something that I think we can't stress more in law enforcement and policing today. Yeah.
Dude, you hear of like all these shootings and murders that happen in Chicago.
Yeah.
I mean, what is that like? I mean, it's even hard. Like you hear some of these numbers, you're talking about like hundreds of shootings, like in a weekend or like 1,000+ shootings in a weekend. And I just, it's hard for me to comprehend.
Right.
But like being a cop down there, I mean, I don't know. What is that like? Like that is just kind of crazy to me.
Yeah. Working in Austin, the 15th district, some of the South Side districts, well, I don't want to say that police officers always get numb to it. And I grew up in the city. So, I mean, there was gang violence all around me. But when there's so much of it, this is what I feel like some of the officers who've kind of been there and mentored me said is when you go to work, especially in a district like that, you have to be able to separate the world that you work in from the reality of your actual home life or the rest of the world, that things that happen there, it's not like the rest of the world and you can't take what you see there and be angry about it and leave. Right. Honestly, I probably candidly, one of the best things that someone told me was, hey, after work, don't go to the bar, just go home because you are going to see a lot of things. I mean, in a weekend, you could see a shooting, a stabbing, things even worse than that, or sometimes domestics are just hard to deal with. So I want to say to some extent, you guys are officers, sometimes you do get numb to it. I feel like I'm a pretty easygoing person. Most people who know me, I'm pretty easygoing. But I can see a difference when I was a police officer and now working, for Verizon, there was like a little bit of a monkey that came off my back that I could kind of take it down a level, be a little more relaxed. And not be numb to a situation. It's not like you want to ignore it, but it is hard. I think mental health is obviously a problem we have in law enforcement, and a lot of cops. It's hard to deal with cops, right? And you're dealing with a world where you generally want to be right, but you're seeing a lot of wrong. and having to deal with that is not always easy.
Yeah, and we're recording this right on the heels of a Chicago police officer that was just killed a week ago.
Yeah.
So Stratton, there's been several before him from, I know agencies all over, but Chicago particularly they seem to get quite a few. I don't know. I mean, everyone kind of jokes that doesn't live in Chicago. Like we just flew to DC and had a layover in Chicago. And I remember the captain that when we were getting off the plane, the captain of the plane was like, "Hey, thanks for coming." He's like, "Hey, welcome to my home state, or I live in the city of Chicago or whatever." And he kind of made a joke about how nice it was, and I was like, "You mean the murder capital of the world?"
Yeah.
He didn't find that to be so funny, but
yeah. Well, I mean, in my role today, right, I've kind of traveled to a lot of law enforcement conferences or meet with customers all across the U.S., and it is interesting coming from Chicago, and then when they hear I was a Chicago police officer. And now they know I work at Verizon. One of the first things I meet with a lot of chiefs or sergeants or lieutenants or officers, and they say, "Oh, I bet you're happy to be gone," And I listen, I miss the job. It was a great career. I think it's still a great department. They're led by a great superintendent. But it's for me, it's great that I still get to be around a lot of law enforcement, and now even broader, like a lot of public safety, right? Fire, EMS, and kind of help them in a different way, bringing technology and introducing how technology could be beneficial to law enforcement or public safety.
Yeah, and people are probably laughing. They're like, "Why is this guy from Verizon like we didn't just go down to the Verizon store and grab Tony and say, 'Hey, you want to come?'"
No, we'll get there because you had a really you had a pretty good niche towards the end of your career at Chicago with tech, right? Tell us about like how you got into that and what your niche was with technology that ultimately led you to the position of working at Verizon Frontline.
So I worked in Austin, and at some point in my career there was, and I forgot what we call it. It might have been just called the Daily Bulletin, right? And we were still working on paper. And I saw there was an internal, if there's job postings, right? It might be tests for sergeants or detectives, could be Marine unit. There was a posting for a job at our headquarters, and they were looking for someone who had essentially technology background, familiar with web design or web development. I don't remember if they said anything other like specific, because cell phones even, right? There was no smartphone or iPhone 15 at the time, but I remember it specifically called out, familiar with web design or web development or graphic design, which kind of suited me. Like I said, I worked in that world prior to my joining the police academy. One thing led to another. I ended up interviewing. I worked in a unit that has combined civilians and sworn officers. And we did a lot. We did a lot of great things and a lot of interesting projects early on. I think Chicago benefited, right? One, from being a large agency. They also had a lot of funding to do and leverage technology early on. So we were joking about at lunch. One of the first projects I was on, it wasn't even web design related. We were early adopters in bringing BlackBerries into policing. Right. It's 2000, probably 7 or so. We're purchasing BlackBerries, ironically, from Verizon. And, what do we do with these things now? BlackBerries are amazing. You could check email. That was amazing at the time. Forget about apps
it's
and everything.
It's still amazing today. Just so you know, to check your email right now on your phone is still amazing.
Yeah. I remember getting a BlackBerry from my first.
I still have a BlackBerry, a Verizon BlackBerry from when I was in the unit, and it sits on my desk at home. And sometimes, especially when COVID happened, we would do virtual meetings, what have you, and I'll hold it up, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, you said it was might have been a BlackBerry 8800 Bold or something."
Had the little spinny thing
scroll wheel, yeah. So, but it was interesting, being in a unit at a police department as an officer that's exploring technology. And at that time, right, it was BlackBerries, but what more could you do with a BlackBerry? Like even today, right? We talk about what can a Verizon smartphone do, right? What can connectivity do for police officers or public safety? How does it actually enhance? When BlackBerries came out, it was like, well, you could check your email when you're in the field, which if you're a supervisor, that was actually pretty amazing. You didn't have to go back to a station, log into whatever laptop you're using at the time. But we really started to push was, okay, but how can we do police related activity on these devices, or how do we leverage other technology? So early on, we were using software that you could run name checks and plates on a BlackBerry as early as 2007, 2008. And the speeds were slow. I mean, we're in 5G today, but there was anyone who's a long time cell phone holder, there was EVDO. This was even before 3G. I mean, it was not fast, but it worked. You could run a name or plate, and I mean, imagine that. I mean, what were you guys still policing around 2008? So.
We just started.
I mean, imagine if you could have some type of device like a BlackBerry.
Old school, dude.
Yeah, I know people at the department that I used to work at just recently have that technology now.
Right.
Like it's just been provided to them. And it's wild to see that the agency you came from not only supported that growth, but also had the funding. And that's huge.
Yeah. I think one of the great things that Chicago did, and specifically the Chicago Police Department, the unit that I was a part of, was leverage police officers to be part of that program, because you could go in a vacuum, right? And just have a bunch of consultants or civilians explore the technology and say, here you go.
This is what you should
This
use.
is what you should use, and this is how you're going to use it.
Yeah.
By having police officers as part of that unit, I think it was a great experience. You know, we joked about, I was part of a program we called, at the time it was a Tahoe with ALPR cameras, and we called it the concept vehicle, right? And it was at ICP years ago when it was in Chicago. I think it was covered in one of the newspapers. And it's almost kind of humorous to think it was a concept vehicle at the time, because ALPR technology it's pretty common today.
Running license plates, right?
Running license plate, yeah. And around 2009, we were doing that. We built one of the first vehicles with ALPR technology. We tied it over a cellular connection with Verizon to a database so we can get from our hot desk, right, stolen cars. And as I was explaining to you guys at lunch, one of the values of being a police officer working on that is, while we were assigned to headquarters, right, that was our duty of assignment, we still had an obligation to do street time, like go to actual districts. And sometimes they would have different districts we'd be deployed at. But because we were developing different technology, we can go out in the field. We would bring that concept Tahoe with an ALPR camera. We actually had a FLIR camera, not just a spotlight. We had a FLIR camera on the driver's side. So we brought that out, and we would just go on patrol with that. And one, it was great for us, right? Because we got to still do street time, but we were also evaluating the technology and saying, hey, is it working? Does it actually work for us, or is it working against us, or work with the manufacturer? How could this be better? But it was exciting. I mean, imagine driving around, you know, as a fairly young officers, and this machine or this computer is just reading tens and hundreds of plates.
You've gotten a ton of experience because your very first day out of the academy, you're a jump out boy. So and all of a sudden you're developing LPR cameras and Blackberries with emails. And by the time you started FTO, you were, you know, like,
oh, guys, I'm ready to test for sergeant. What's FTO?
Yeah.
I think one of the big things, and this is what I talk about today as being a part of Verizon and Verizon Frontline, is we're consumers of our own product, right? Similar to how when I was at Chicago, we were developing technology or using different types of technology and experimenting with them, but we were going out in the field and using it. And that's kind of the thing that I like to bring into the Verizon Frontline world, is that, yeah, we're developing technology and solution for first responders and public safety, but there's a lot of us at Verizon who were boots on the ground, right? There's myself, right, as a former police officer, but we have, I think from a veteran standpoint, we have, I want to say it's 6,000 plus veteran V-teamers. We have, there's a subgroup of active first responders in Verizon. Even on our crisis response team, you know, we could talk about that a little. Everyone who's on their crisis response team has some type of experience in public safety or as a first responder. And we're consumers of our own product, right? We're developing solutions and bring communication and connectivity to law enforcement or public safety, but we're using things and testing things that are solutions that they can get today. They're not, you know, some space material that we found. These are things that we can actually give to customers today.
So let's shift gears some.
Sure.
And you spent 15 years as a cop in Chicago.
Yes.
And then you made the determination, I'm going to leave law enforcement and then start a new career. So what is that like? And then how do you find a job at Verizon Frontline, and how do you even go from one to the other?
Yeah, it's kind of I feel like a lot of things are a funny story, to me at least.
Not to us.
Yeah. But, you know,
it is funny to us. No, I'm just kidding.
But But no, it's a great question. I especially now, because I do get a lot of questions. People ask, well, how do you make that transition? And you see, and there's even companies now that are forming to help military or police officers transition from like their current job into something in private sector. So for me, working at headquarters and working on the projects that I was working on, I got to meet a lot of companies that work in that space. Whatever the type of ALPR cameras, cellular connectivity like Verizon, all kinds of companies I was working with. And I always thought there was a time frame of about 2 or 3 years, maybe it was 2 years, that you'd be working with the sales rep or whoever your normal contact was, and they would always reach out and say, hey, we want to meet up with you. I want to introduce you to someone. And that new someone was the new person because our current representative or our contact was moving on to a bigger role or a different job. And, that happened a few times. So it kind of made me think like I'm involved as just as deep as they are, but on the customer side. So it kind of made me think, where do I want to go in my career as a police officer? Do I want to continue and, maybe try to work my way up the ranks, sergeant, or do I want to be a detective? Do I want to do some interesting things? Like maybe I want to join the Marine because I swam competitively all my life. And, I was a lifeguard at the beach for, I think 8 years of my life. So I really started to take a deeper look inward, and I just didn't feel what I wanted to do professionally was necessarily in line. It wasn't to say that I was kind of tired of the career. I really loved the career as a police officer, but I just felt my path was going down a different way. And I had met, different people in the private sector, and really Verizon wasn't on my radar at all. I had, met and interviewed and was contacted by a number of companies that were at the time really looking to expand what they did with public safety. At some point I was about to leave to go to another company, and one of the, I want to say his title at the time was, associate director or client partner, who I knew pretty well. He reached out to me and said, hey, I kind of heard you might be leaving Chicago PD. And I said, I think I'm gone. It's not official. Yeah. And he said, hey, I just wondered, do you ever think about working for Verizon? And I said, I did for a little bit. And I looked on, you go to their website, look on a job. I said, honestly, there's really nothing that I think would fit my background. And he goes, well, I think you have a really interesting background and you could do a lot. I'd love for you to meet a few people. One thing led to another. And there was a role, it's called a solutions architect. So a lot of the solutions that I was buying, lack of better terms, as a customer, right, or being introduced to, that's essentially what a solutions architect would do, right? Anything, we're not just solutions architects don't really deal with like, hey, you want to buy an iPhone or more advanced solutions and connectivity and what that world looks like. I was the consumer side of that, and really I just started to switch, and I'll be on the other side of the table. So it wasn't an easy transition because it is a different role. And I had worked in the private sector before. It's a sales position, so that's also a little different, right? I mean, you're in sales. There's numbers you have to meet. It's not like in policing. Your pay is always the same. It's a negotiated salary. So I think the transition, because I went to Verizon and I was familiar with their team to an extent and it worked a long time with them. That's why they say, Verizon has been working with public safety for over 30 years. I believe it because I was a customer as early as 2006, 2007. So when we talk about our commitment and saying, hey, we've been working with public safety for 30 years, I believe it because I was a customer. And I think that also made it easier for me to learn the world of being in the private sector and wanting to represent Verizon because I had a great experience with them. And I feel like I could also bring that message to other public safety agencies. So again, it's not the easiest transition, but I think it's one that a lot of law enforcement are ready for because of being able to communicate.
Your title's not the easiest either. Yeah. So I think everything's been difficult. You're the executive program manager of public safety with Verizon.
Yeah, that is, that's I call it my fancy job title. And
well, you've earned it, so we got to say it. I mean, it's earned. It's earned. Yeah.
No, thank you. To simplify that, and right, as a former cop, I try to make things less complicated. So when I meet with customers or I'm presenting, what I like to say is under Verizon Frontline, my leader, Vice President Corey Davis, he leads the Verizon Frontline organization. I essentially work for him, and a simple way of putting it is if it looks, sounds, or smells like public safety, especially law enforcement, we probably have our hand in the, probably more than our foot in the door. So when it comes to developing strategies, programs, and ultimately, how do you operationalize those things? It's one thing to come up with ideas, right? Even in law enforcement, you come up with strategies. It's one thing to just come up with them. You have to also know how to operationalize those. Who are all the people? What are all the pieces of puzzle you need to put together to get those programs to ultimately benefit, right, our sales field and benefit our customers? So under that umbrella of executive program manager of public safety, it really relates to like me helping and developing strategies to serve public safety or our public safety customers.
So I think it's safe to say that people know what Verizon is.
Yeah.
But we've been saying Verizon Frontline also. So can you tell us what the difference is and what Verizon Frontline is?
No, hey, that is a great question. Verizon Frontline, the way I define it, is all the things that we do as a company to help support first responders and public safety. That is Verizon Frontline. And one of those things that, probably see more of, right, in the media, especially in light of recent events with weather and hurricanes, right? Our Verizon Frontline crisis response team, they are a big part of that Verizon Frontline umbrella. I actually was part of that team, and I covered 5 states in the Midwest for 2 years. But I've done some interesting things. I think you guys had mentioned you
did go to an F-16 fighter jet that went down. And how did Verizon, you with Verizon Frontline and being on the critical response team, how did they play a role in that? Because if anybody were to see that story, or it's now public, that part of it probably doesn't get mentioned. So like, how are you guys involved in that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question and a great story. Like I said, it's not something we would ever build a commercial around or any marketing effort, but it is something that shows, I like to share the story because it shows the commitment that Verizon Frontline has to public safety. So for some background, I want to say it was Friday or Saturday night. I had just put a drink on my nightstand, and my wife and I were probably going to watch some drama or something on Netflix. And
Drama.
Let's say drama. I don't know. If we're watching it together, it's probably some type of drama. It's not going to be like a sci-fi or action movie. But I got a call, right? And if you're on the crisis response team, it is a 24/7, 365 job. And that is something that when you apply and you accept, you are ready to take on that responsibility, and you train, you have go bags. I had a truck and a trailer in my driveway, and I had access to equipment whenever I needed. But let's just go with, it was Friday night. I get a call from Jason Mitchell, who's our senior manager, who's great. Actually, I want to say, Jason, forgive me if I made this mistake. I believe he was also an officer, but also a canine officer when he was on the job.
Jason.
Yeah. And Jason's great, but you might not want to get a call from him on Friday night because it means something happened. And we get the call, and a fighter jet had crashed in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And anyone who knows that area, it's a national forest. There's probably not many humans there. It's just all trees. And for me, that's about a 12 or 13 hour drive. So myself, Jason out of Indiana, and another crisis response manager, we were all communicating, said, hey, we're ready to go. I mean, it's just a matter of me put on my jeans, grab a go bag in my truck, and we're out. So 9, 10 o'clock at night, we all make the 12, 13 hour drive, depending on where we were coming from. We land there early in the morning, and and obviously we're trying to communicate with each other to get as much detail from either the state police and or the military on what do you need from us? Because we can do a lot of different things. We want to make sure that we understand and we're ready to go when we get there, right? So they give us some loose details on where the crash is, what's actually happened, what they're deploying. So the law enforcement agency was going to deploy a mobile command center to work and coincide with the military. They know that there was going to be a connectivity issue there. We knew that we could bring our equipment and build a private 4G connection for them, or even a private Wi-Fi bubble, right? So if comms or data security was needed, we could build that bubble just for the military or just the state police. So we get there, I think it's 4 or 5 in the morning. We actually beat the law enforcement agency in the mobile command center. So we end up getting escorted by some special ops guys on ATVs who have to bring us into this national forest, and they're briefing us on where they're going to send us, who's there, what type of equipment they have and what's needed to connect. And it was winter, so it was not, it was cold.
How was the drive up the mountain?
Yeah, definitely no mountains. But it's a long drive. I mean, if Friday night you're ready to wind down from the week, and 12, 13 hours pulling a trailer is, I think that's also takes, a special person. The people who are on the crisis response team for Verizon Frontline, I believe they are all special because bless you.
Yeah, thanks.
They're willing to make that drive and commitment to public safety. So we get there eventually, we meet up with the state police. They bring in their command center. It's mobile command center, but it's mobile, but there's no comms. So, within 30 minutes, we have something called a spot trailer. We can ultimately set up communications, whether it's voice or data connectivity, even when in a national forest where there's no signal anywhere. So we were able to build secure comms for not only the state police, but for the military, if they need to transmit data, which, that's important. Hey, there's a fighter jet down. They want to transmit as much information as fast as they can. And if we weren't able to build comms for them, the only way they could do that is take the data, drive out of the national forest, find the closest building or facility that you can actually get Wi-Fi. But now when the Verizon Frontline crisis response team goes, we're doing that boots on the ground. If we need to, the crisis response team, they've slept in their trucks. They've slept alongside the first responders. We're there until they don't need us. As long as you need comms, or if comms are restored in a different way, that's where the crisis response team comes.
Wow.
Yeah. It's really interesting. And us as cops, you being a cop, you don't think about that stuff. When you go to these like major catastrophes, whether it's weather related, like when we talked about the Hurricane Helene incident, Verizon Frontline responded out to that. Well, we did a full episode on. We've been to wildfires out here in California. We get a ton of wildfires. Like when we go to stuff like that, infrastructure is lost. Everything gets wiped out.
Yeah.
Nobody really thinks, how do we get support to be able to communicate with each other?
Right.
What are the needs of, whether it's for the first responders, people, hospitals, staff, whatever staff needs to be able to communicate. That's where you guys come in and basically solve that problem. I'm just saying, like, that's just a piece that people don't even think about or talk about. I was unfamiliar with it, to be honest with you. So, like, if you take the Hurricane Helene or Milton down in Florida.
Yeah.
People, they do recovery efforts and all that stuff. It all requires communication. And a lot of times this stuff happens out in rural areas where that stuff is going to get completely taken out. Without that, it just makes the job 1,000 times harder, and it would take so much longer to get things done because like Eric was on our show, he was out in a town where they did lose connection to everything and they had no comms. And he's talking driving hours just to hey, we located a family. Now we have to drive almost 2 hours back to camp to tell people where they're at, and then drive another 2 hours to try to get them the resources or help to get them out. So that's where I think this all kind of like ties in of why Verizon Frontline is so important. Yeah. In the law enforcement or first responder space.
And I almost want to take it back a step because 100%, if right, we call them dark sky days, right? The crisis response. We're in Verizon. We talk about blue sky days, like today. Well, it's California, but it's actually raining, which is kind of interesting.
Usually it's sunny here, and it has been sunny. Today's the only day that it rained, and you decided to come.
So we'll call it the bluish sky day here in California. But I wanted to just take it back a step because 100%, like I said, crisis response team is there to respond in those dark sky days or the emergencies, whether it's natural disasters or I supported a lot of like riots that were happening in the Midwest or tornadoes, but that really starts early on, right? It's all about training and preparation. And that's where relationships with our customers, whether it's the police departments, fire departments, emergency management agencies, the military, 3-letter agencies, being part of exercises and training with them, even if it's a tabletop, right? That's what we do so that when it is a dark sky day, right? When there's a Hurricane Milton or Helene or an F-16 crashes, right? One, we know how to do what we need to do, right? The crisis response team does their own training, right? Even separate from a customer, right? Making sure that we have the equipment, we know how to use the equipment, and that we're even training, to set up, right? Depending on what the need is. But we also need to be able to do that with the customers, right? So with the police agencies or first responders, what do they need when they have a hurricane, or let's say there's whatever the event is? It could be we're setting up a COVID test site, right? That was a big thing when I was still a crisis response member. What type of equipment or what type of comms do they need? And if we're training with them, then they also know what we bring to the table. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where some of those relationships start to really matter, right? Not just Verizon Frontline and you're my customer and we want to sell you something. That's not really what it's about. It's about just bringing what public safety needs. And I think that's why I like to take a step back, is to make sure that, I want the departments to know, like, hey, reach out to, if you're working with Verizon, or reach out to the Verizon Frontline, because if you have training or exercises that you're doing today, and, we do a ton of those. The team is constantly, it's kind of like being in the military. If you're not responding, you're probably training or doing after action reports, getting ready to do something. Maybe you need to improve something on how we respond, or maybe we need different equipment to support agencies in a different way. So that's really where it all begins. And, I think there's a lot of things that we did at Hurricane Milton and Hurricane Helene. Some of the numbers, we did over 200 responses and had over 100 deployments between both those hurricanes. And again, it is tough. There's places that are rural. For us to get there, we're not necessarily going on our own. We're going with a public safety agency. So it might be, the emergency management agency assigns us to go somewhere with the fire department or a police department. We've done a lot of search and rescue. So establishing those relationships with whoever it is local to you from the Verizon Frontline side, that's where it's really valuable, because you can start to understand how we operate. And more importantly, we can understand how they operate and what they might need. And when it comes to connectivity, whether it's 4G or 5G, we know what we need to do and what we need to bring to the table in those circumstances.
Well, I think what's interesting is that you're talking about all these deployments, and it's hard to be everywhere immediately.
Right.
Especially like what you're saying is you attach to these other units and then you're going in to help support. And to get to one location, you might have to almost, or that unit might have to find an alternate route, or bulldoze a dirt road, or move trees and recreate and build a dam, or not build a dam, but build a bridge. Just
we've been a dam failure.
Maybe you built dams. I don't know.
We can't build a dam, but I could tell you in the Midwest.
Mark's it's kicking in again.
Yeah. It takes a lot to get to places at times, but it's really interesting to think, because generally I would say probably a lot of people, because I thought that is, Verizon's just involved with cell phones. Kyle's still laughing over here, but so are you. But you guys are integrated in a lot of different aspects. The military, government, 3-letter agencies, you even mentioned at lunch, you might have a refrigerator that is connected, which is wild to me.
Yeah, there's obviously a lot of things in today's world. I feel like everything's, these microphones might be connected. We don't even know, right?
They might be.
Right. But, when it comes to public safety and our first responders, it might be something that they don't always think about, right? Technology to me isn't something that when a law enforcement, or let's say a police officer or a fireman's working, they shouldn't have to think whether or not this piece of technology is going to work or not, right? So we kind of recall that back to your radio. No one ever questioned when I key up on my radio, I know it's going to work, or that is my expectation, or any equipment that I carry on my person, it's going to work. That's the expectation that I believe Verizon Frontline brings, right? So squad car connected, a connected
tell
vehicle,
us about
right?
the car connectivity.
I think the advancements of what you can do today in a vehicle, to me, they're amazing. And it's not like I was a police officer in the 1970s. From 2002 being, a recruit to the time I left to even today, the advancements in cellular technology, right? So I think I mentioned EVDO. That was a long time ago, and it doesn't seem that long ago. But what you can do with a connected vehicle in a squad car today over 5G is exponentially better, and it's bringing faster speeds is always appreciated, right? So downloading a video or real-time video, right? Situational awareness, that's always huge for police officers. The more information that an officer can have before they get to a job, or what information can their supervisors know while their officer's at a job. There's one way to get that information, and that's over cellular, right? And 5G makes that faster. We talk about download speeds or latency. Latency is probably not a thing we're used to in policing because we feel like radios, they're fast. You click, you mic on, it's right away. And over the years, 5G latency has gotten lower, right? So we say download speeds, you always want to go up, right? I want more, like 1 gig download, whatever the speed is, you want to go up. You want latency numbers to go down. So that's how fast data transfers, just like your radio is. It's almost zero latency, right? You could talk to someone on the other side of your county or your city, and they're going to get it immediately. You want that experience with your cellular provider, right? In Verizon Frontline, we're able to prioritize traffic, right? Whether it's on your smartphone or if you're still using basic phones or flip phones, we're able to prioritize a first responder's data and or voice in different ways. So it keeps them separate than, say, my daughter's playing on TikTok or people live streaming because they want to be on Instagram or something. Like, we have ways that we can prioritize their law enforcement or public safety traffic separate from the consumer. And that's important, right? We don't want to necessarily put them in the same bucket, right? We want to put them in the front of the line. And to me, that's something as a former police officer who now works at Verizon, I'm proud to say that we're able to provide that type of priority service. And in a squad car, connecting that vehicle, it opens the door because they're only going to add more technology into a squad car. I mean, probably when most of us got on, at best you were lucky if you even had an actual PDT or MDT or regular. And it didn't work, right?
I handwrite everything when I first started.
So you think about that from either handwriting to, okay, now I have a rugged laptop in my car, but now I'm going to put ALPR cameras, in-car cameras, body-worn cameras, all these things you can do that are valuable to law enforcement or police officers. But how do you get that data to somebody else, right? It can't just always live in the car. And that's where, like, that connected vehicle over Verizon 5G, to me, it's great, right? We're prioritizing the traffic, and you could start to do more things, and the police officer can just get more information. Imagine if you had more information before you respond, not just here's the address of the job, here's the description of what to expect, but what if you could have like more images, or what if you could have video from a nearby camera and have that in your squad car, or maybe you can even have it on your cell phone, which I don't want to say maybe, because you can do those things today.
Those are things that you can do today. I mean, I know my agency's investing heavy in the technology piece. And you said it earlier, like most agencies are very short staffed. I mean, it's never like really recovered after COVID. Right. And I don't want to say technology isn't replacing cops, but technology is for sure playing a huge part in voiding the gap, I think, for whether it's for investigation purposes, detectives, the video you talked about, there's cameras everywhere all over cities now, like
flying drones over to check stuff.
It's insane. Yeah. You've got drones now that literally are like perched on different buildings throughout a city, and they're responding to call for services so that cops don't have to go. I mean,
now there's, they say, everything's as a service now. Now you're starting to see drones as a service.
Yeah, it's wild.
But even it's a great use case you guys bring up, right? So drones as a first responder. I've heard that term a lot. It's a buzz. It's really a thing now. But traditionally, right? So if I'm a 107 pilot certified, right? Drone, and all our crisis response team, right? They have 107 certifications. So it's kind of where you get a lot of the experiences in-house and partnering with agencies. Is if I'm a police department, I'm doing a search and rescue, I'm flying my drone to survey an area. Generally, that video is just coming, right? If this is my controller, I've got it in my hand, I'm seeing that video. I may have a spotter next to me, and he's seeing that video. But maybe I want to get that video feed somewhere else. Right, like to a mobile command center, or back to if you have a headquarters or real-time response centers, right? Those are huge. We can do that for you at Verizon, right? You put a 5G enabled router and a video input, as long as that, because it's a computer at the end of the day, right? It has an IP address. We can send that over Verizon 5G to wherever you need it. That expands that capability of what your drone program's doing now, right? There is a value, right? You want the pilot and the spotter to see it and help with that search and rescue or whatever the use case is at the time. But if you can bring that awareness outside of the field to other places, it's exponentially better now. Because do you need to send more resources?
Yeah, maybe
the pilot
maybe
might not be able to say that, right? But
Yeah.
someone watching the video at a command center, he could determine, right? Or maybe they're doing crowd surveillance, at a large gathering that's potentially has a capability of being a riot. Like, okay, the pilot might not be able to key up on the radio, but now he's transmitting over Verizon 5G to another area, right? Now they can make those decisions. So there's a lot of things like that. I think technology 100% should supplement, and enhance what a public safety or a law enforcement officer's job is, not make it more difficult.
So from, say, someone that's just listening to this podcast right now, and they work at a police department or a sheriff's office, how do they know, how do I know I have this capability in my car, or how do we get this capability, or how do I start training with Verizon Frontline? Like, what are some things that you can connect us to?
Yeah.
To make some of this stuff easier?
Arguably, I'll say many or most of agencies are probably working with us today, but it's a question, right? If you're listening to this podcast and you're wondering, like, hey, how do I find out about some of these solutions? Whether it's connected vehicles, right? Failover connectivity at a 911 center, or I want to partner with the crisis response team, or maybe have them join one of our exercises so we can kind of learn about each other's capabilities. Definitely reach out. I mean, hey, you can reach out to me. I'll leave my contact information. But if you are working, there'll generally be like a client executive assigned to the account. And that's really the way to open the door to everything else. I mean, outside of them managing the account, it's really managing the relationship, because it's more than just, hey, providing that connectivity. We can bring, the crisis response team to give a presentation on their capabilities, or just even like holistic conversations of what are agencies doing with connected vehicles, or why do I need failover connectivity? I mean, sometimes, like law enforcement or police officers can be stubborn, and just like all of us in any topic, sometimes you just don't know what we don't know sometimes. And like failover connectivity is not something that everyone has on the top of their mind, right? Even in here, if this was a 911 center and your primary wired or fiber connection went down, imagine that, right? A 911 center, either they go down for whatever, it might be a cyber attack, fiber cut. Verizon has failover connectivity solutions over 4G and 5G so that you can maintain continuity of business even when your primary internet connection goes down. And that's happened. It happens a lot. I mean, you could be power outages. Again, cyber attacks are happening. I mean, that's a great kind of use case sometimes for failover connectivity, because I've been part of it as a crisis response team where, we're responding to a cyber attack and say, well, how would the crisis response team help in a cyber attack? Well, one of the first things they're always doing is you need to shut down your primary form of connectivity, not just the computers all the time, but how are they getting into your police department or 911 center? And if it's a cyber attack, you're shutting that primary form down. Through failover connectivity with Verizon, you could build a separate cellular connection over 5G so you can still have some level of continuity of business. Eventually, you're going to restore your primary. But to me, that's like, redundancy or having plan Bs, right, in public safety or being a first responder it's like part of training. You should always have an option. And to me, that's something like failover it's like an easy button. Hey, if something goes down, and sometimes let's say it's a power, right? Oh, well, I have a generator, right? I know if my power goes on, I can just turn on my generator. Still maintaining. Same thing with failover connectivity. If something goes down, and sometimes you have one or two other forms, right? Wired connectivity, but that goes down. Let's just switch over, and it's an instant hot switch over to cellular. And that's something we're doing for customers today, right? Whether it's police stations, fire departments. To me, I always say PSAPs in the Midwest, we say public safety answering points, 911 centers. Having that redundant connection or a backup connection is vital, especially in to serving public safety.
Well, I've learned a lot from this. I got to be honest. I was not quite sure of everything that you do, and there's a lot here. So I'm really happy that you brought the rain when you came from from Chicago, come out here to explain all this stuff. Sounds like you've had a really, really interesting career, starting out as a jump out boy, starting to create all this wild technology at your department, and then now transitioning to Verizon Frontline and still helping to create stuff. This is amazing. So I'm really thankful that you came. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, part of our podcast and what we do is like, we really do try to educate not only cops, but people that are not in law enforcement. And I think it's good for people to understand and know what goes into this stuff and who are the players involved. And when something major happens, like somebody may be listening to this who has no clue, but now something happens and they go, oh, okay, well now I understand, what is going on and how they're able to maintain communication and cellular connectivity and stuff. So I think it's just great opportunity to tell people, at least on our platform, what it is that Verizon Frontline does and what you do for the first responder community.
Yeah, no, and thank you guys for having me on. I was 100% excited as someone who actually listens to the podcast as well. And you guys have, we kind of laughed about it, right? You guys have had Jay Wadsworth. I'll just throw his name out there, right? My instructor, Jay Wadsworth, where if it's your first time listening to the podcast, he's a police officer and a black belt. I've studied a black belt as well. And my instructor, his first match, or Jay's first black belt match was versus my instructor, Mark Viva. So
that's wild.
Yeah, it's always feel like a small world.
We're buddies with Jay, and
ask him about it next time.
I'm gonna share this with him, and might have to pit you and him together.
Yeah,
I want to see a black belt match.
Tony's got some hidden little gems here. He's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, right?
Yeah.
Also a stand-up comedian. He's actually been on stage. You missed some of the conversation we had, but he's been on stage. He's a stand-up comedian.
Dang, I wouldn't have guessed that.
I know it's. We're just learning so much.
Yeah. No, guys, I think this platform is great for what you guys do, right? And I appreciate being able to share the Verizon Frontline message. I love a lot of things and topics that you guys talk about and the stress that you guys put a lot of time on training and being prepared. I think I saw on Instagram you guys were recently at like I don't know, it's a close quarters combat or some facility and
Mark was. That's actually here in town.
Okay.
It's all about like breaching and stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think even in the private sector, right? In living in a world that in the private sector that we're serving public safety and first responders, I still think training is huge. And I'm always an advocate for if I can get our team on Verizon, like, hey, go reach out to your police department, see if you can do a ride along, right? Understand what they're going through. And when we are proposing something, why they might think it's difficult or where there's opportunity, right? Or spend a day at the academy or, go to the fire department and, spend some time with them to understand and train with them because again, whether it's jiu-jitsu or the job that I do today or law enforcement, to me, training is huge and being able to be ready and be prepared for something. No one really knows what's going to happen when the real stuff hits the fan.
Yeah.
But if you train, and I believe that even on our side of Verizon Frontline, right? Our crisis response team, they spend endless hours training, probably exponentially more than they are actually responding, which, we do that so we can be better at helping public safety and even the products and services, right? From priority services. And there's things called preemption, which, we didn't even get into that, but being able to understand and test the things that we want to bring to public safety, right? That goes a long way in making sure that what we do at Verizon Frontline is ready, right, for our customers.
Yeah. Well, there's no way we'd be able to effectively do our job if companies like Verizon Frontline didn't exist. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for coming out here. And we want to thank Verizon Frontline for sponsoring this episode. So thank you so much for being here, coming out, bringing the weather.
Where's Guam? Not in the Philippines?
No,
Mark learned that today too.
No.
Tony had to school you up on that.
That's
Guam is it's in the Philippines, but not in the Philippines. Apparently.
That was a pre-record conversation. Mark's having a rough day today.
Yeah.
That's all.
Been through a lot today. So.
Usually you're bagging on me all the time. Today.
Today it's been weird.
Yeah. Today the attention's
it's the rain.
It's got to be the rain.
It's Cali rain.
You brought it.
Probably. So, all right. Well, shoot, Tony. We'll get you out of here. Again, dude, can't thank you enough for flying all the way out here. We seriously greatly appreciate you, Verizon Frontline, and everybody involved. All right. Well, hey, that's it for this episode, you guys. End it with be safe, be smart, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode.
See ya.